All right, now to our first conversation. We see the ongoing conflicts there between Iran and Israel has escalated tensions in the Middle East, one of the world's most strategic oil-producing regions. We're seeing global oil prices have fluctuated sharply as markets respond to fears of supply disruptions, geopolitical uncertainty, and potential sanctions. These developments come at a time when many countries, including Nigeria, are already grappling with high fuel prices, subsidy reforms, and challenges in domestic refining capacity. We also had the latest monthly oil production reports there coming out from OPEC. That's the one for May. Let's discuss all of this now with Dikwal. This is the Vice Chair, African Energy Council. Joining me via Zoom. Great to have you on the show.
Hi, Lottie. Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic.
Catch up.
Yeah, so I know I always like to catch up with oil production reports there for major producers. At this point, we have the latest one for May. Give me your key takeaways from the latest MOMR from OPEC.
So, Lottie, if I just start from very high level, I think many people would recognize that in the last OPEC report, there was the clear message from OPEC Plus that they will put approximately 411,000 barrels per day in the month of May. Well, guess what? The number of barrels they put onto
All right, we have some disruptions there with the network. We're still talking to Dikwal there, and it's all about what's playing out in the oil market. At this point, we're seeing issues there with geopolitics impacting oil prices, and also talking about oil production. At this point, seeing that oil production that dipped for the month of May, and that's for Nigeria and some of the oil producers right there. We always track those reports to see how most of these oil exporters are doing when it comes to production of oil there. We'll try and get Chinan there to contribute to what's playing out in the global oil market. At this point, we're seeing traders in the oil market. They're trying to navigate all that's playing out right now with the geopolitics in the Middle East and the tension right there. And what does that mean for fuel prices in countries like Nigeria and major economies? We're still going to be we're going to figure out what's going to happen with oil prices going up, and definitely we know there's that relationship between the global oil price and fuel prices, and we've seen elevated prices in Nigeria, even though definitely we've seen those ex-depot slashes there from the Dangote refinery. Will that be able to navigate some of the price increases that are expected, with fuel prices when oil prices actually go up so much to figure out there. Let's see if we have Chinan again. Chinan, I lost you for a moment there. Are you back?
Back. Really speak a lot. The connection just went out. Yeah, back.
Fantastic. So you could conclude your thought there. You're talking about the latest report there for oil production from countries like Nigeria. That's data from OPEC.
In this context, 3-4 months, it's been relatively flat. I would say we've been oscillating between 1.5 million barrels per day and about 1.4 million barrels per day. So I'll take us back to April. We were notching 1.48 million barrels per day. Unfortunately, in May, we dipped about 2% to about 1.45 million barrels per day. So not very significant, certainly a dip compared to where we were. So I think the overarching message here is that we need to break out of this zone where we are. If I take us back to January of this year, we're 1.53, which was something we lauded a lot because we're right there at the OPEC production quota. We've not been able to break that and go one beyond that. So I think it's something for us to think about with that.
All right, so, looking at the conflict in the Middle East there, definitely it's all about what's playing out with Israel and Iran at this point, with the escalations between both countries. We see the impact there in the oil market. Is it for sure going to be elevated oil prices, with the tensions that we see there? Or is there a possibility oil prices might not go up?
And so, I mean, like, you would have seen that it's a super complex situation, and I'll be quite the way traders are pricing things in is super complex. The reason for that is, if you think about it, when many people think about conflict in the Middle East, just the thought of it, would put $5 per barrel onto the oil price. Not quite happening here because the variables are super complex. You see that, yes, there's bombardment going on, yes, there's conflict going on, but if you look at today, price has actually been coming down because the experts who are reading around the conflict can see that certain key indicators in terms of the conflict, the risk factors are actually coming down. So we definitely expect the price of crude oil to be $80 per barrel, $90 per barrel. I'm not so sure any from signals we're seeing right now. Price of Brent, yesterday and today around $74 per barrel. So there is potential for that to go up if certain critical factors are breached. But I think so far, all of the signs that we're seeing, it does look like more of a downside risk than upside. So we expect that we might be around here in this zone for quite a while, except if certain things do happen in the Gulf, then I think, unfortunately, $100 per barrel, maybe even $120 per barrel, depending on how the conflict goes, will not be off the table for this. So, critical point there, let me just put it out. If the conflict escalates to the point where the Strait of Hormuz is blocked for some reason, or we have a huge catastrophe, then I think under those situations there'll be disruption. We can see the price of crude oil go to $120. Now, bear in mind, even now as we speak, some oil facilities were hit. On both sides. We had a refinery on the Israeli side, we had a refinery on the Iranian side. But all of those have not, the price of oil very high. I think there's certain critical indicators that could make that situation young.
Right, and you did mention $100 per barrel oil there. Which countries or regions do you think would see the sharpest rise in fuel prices? If that happens, and definitely we know that relationship between global oil prices and fuel prices.
A straight question. Any country that's had completely liberalized markets, like we do in Nigeria, would see the impact of that immediately. What's the reason for that? The reason for that is because you're buying crude oil at international markets, so you're procuring time potentially at $100 per barrel. Once it's at that price, then you immediately pass it on to your consumers. So a country like Nigeria is entirely experienced. Before we had a subsidy regime, which is widely criticized, and I agree there's lots of all of those reasons. Subsidy regime is gone. That cushion basically is gone. Right now, we're dealing with pure play market forces. If the price of crude goes up, we'll feel it. Having said that, I'm going to segue a little bit into what we're seeing, and I think I could hear you talk about what Dangote is doing, with the midstream side of things. I think that's really exciting because that's one of the ways perhaps that could lead to much lower, PMS prices at the pump without it.
All right, so how do you think, like in a country like Nigeria, how the government can somehow protect consumers, from escalating or higher fuel prices? You think there's any options, at this point to keep prices of fuel down?
Well, a few things. On the 29th of May of 2023, Bola Tinubu said subsidy is gone. That was the exact statement. And we saw that in the removal of full subsidy, from petroleum prices. And the second thing I'd say is we're just seeing it 2 days ago, the announcement of 4,000 trucks by Dangote. Again, that takes away subsidy. What do I mean? What I mean here is this, that if, crude oil, then you take some PMS from Lagos and stick it to Maiduguri. The moment he lands in Maiduguri, he is owed a certain amount of money based on the petroleum equalization fund. Okay? The difference, basically, bridging the difference. That kind of thing is some sort of a subsidy. Okay, that's some sort of a subsidy. With the announcement 2 days ago by Dangote, that's again taking off that subsidy away. So, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we are, whether we like it or not, going to feel the full market forces. I think there are a few things here, Ladi, that are really worth thinking about and celebrating. One is, I think, when I just focus on the 4,000 trucks, and pardon me, I'm focusing on that. One of the things is we have 4,000 trucks, all of them running on compressed natural gas. Compressed natural gas, super efficient. One, very efficient. Number two, very cheap. The price of transportation across the country will drop significantly. That's number one. Number two is a controversial point. But the reality of it is this is a direct attack on a lot of the midstream companies, midstream infrastructure retailers in Nigeria. Without a doubt, there is no path. But when we look at something like that, Ladi, I'll say two things. One, there are several stakeholders in this value chain. There is the midstream players, like we talk about, and the petroleum marketers. There is the common man. Depending how you look at it, I can tell you this. It's probably bad news for the midstream players and the petroleum marketers, but it's great news for Nigerian citizens. If you're a guy who's in Borno, you can be assured of lifting, of taking or buying PMS at a very consistent price and probably much lower like than you're paying. Today in Borno State, when you go, the price of PMS is about 1,200 naira a litre, something of that sort. I can assure you, if we start from, we're having this conversation in September, August, September, October, when this kicks off, you probably see the price of PMS in Borno around 920, 950, or just less than 1,000. The reason for that is one, cheap cost of transportation, but beyond that, consistent pricing, because that's what this is meant to do. And I would say this, which is slightly controversial. The reality of it is when you look at the petroleum marketers who sit within the value chain, it's not a lot of value addition. These are middlemen, and pure play economics, middlemen put not a lot of value. That's the reality into the value chain. They're there to squeeze margin and squeeze value, squeezing value away from the ordinary Nigerian. In this particular case, if the middleman goes away, the whole of that value can be returned to the ordinary person. So if you find PMS at 1,200 naira, you can find that people can buy it at 950, maybe 920 now, and 9
All right, so I'd like to get your strategic outlook, at this point, looking at the short to medium term there. What are you seeing for the global oil market if this conflict between Iran and Israel, if that escalates at this point? What are you seeing short and medium term?
If this conflict goes on for a very long time, it really escalates. Like I said, there are a couple of things. First of those is if it really escalates, then expect that we're buying crude oil at really high prices, potentially north of $100, a barrel. If that happens, then a country like Nigeria, you can be assured that we'd expect inflation everywhere. Headline inflation, food inflation, and for much of what we do. The reason for that is most goods are priced based on energy, and once that goes up, then you expect that we'll start to have inflation. That's number one. But in the medium, let's say that is incredible and very good news for a country like Nigeria. We're an oil producing state. Our budget is based on crude oil sales. So from that standpoint, $75 a barrel, we bring here in our budget, we balance the budget. The $100 per barrel, then that's great news because an institution like the NSIA, Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, would have huge amount of proceeds coming for them to invest on behalf of the Nigerian states. It's chicken and egg. On one side, we feel the pain. On the other side, because we're all producing nation, then I think we can reap the benefits very effectively. The other thing to think about is if this conflict escalates and goes really high, then Africa will start to look a lot more attractive for investment. Okay, there's a lot of capital, sort of in the Gulf, in the Middle East here, and if this conflict keeps going on, then many people will be looking at where to put this capital. So expect more FIDs into Africa projects that plenty sit on the sidelines and the final investment decision is not being taken. Expect that there could be movement on that front. So we can start to see a lot more capital coming in. We can start to see crude oil sourcing. Okay, so many people who are sourcing crude from the Middle East might now have to start to look at sourcing from Nigeria, Angola, Ghana, a variety of countries, and even gas, the price of gas. So this is the other thing that many people don't talk about so much. If this conflict escalates very significantly, even around the Middle East, there's a huge amount of gas that leaves the Middle East and goes into Europe. Now, if this conflict goes up, then the price of gas becomes really high. A lot of the countries, around the Mediterranean, so Algeria, Egypt, even Nigeria, becomes gas coming from these countries becomes really, really exciting. So overall, I think it's a mix of good news and bad news to answer this.
Yeah, definitely a big mix there. We'll keep tracking to see how it all plays out for these market investors and consumers alike. Thank you so much, Chinan Dikwal, Vice Chair, African Energy Council, for sharing your perspective with us. Thank you.
Yeah,